Last week we were on classification, so this week we are talking about living and non-living things, the second chapter. So last week we were talking about diversity and classification. Diversity is basically many different kind of things on Earth, whereas classification is to group things based on reason. So because of the many different things on Earth, right, scientists have to classify and group things based on certain characteristic or properties they have. So as I was talking about the last lesson, basically because of these many different things on Earth, we classify them, and broadly speaking, there are two main groups. Okay, the first group is the living, which are the things that's alive, and then the second group is the non-living, which is the things that's not alive. Now, some of the non-living things can be alive previously. So a simple example is wood. Okay, wood, we know it comes from tree, and you should know that tree is a living thing. So although wood is a non-living thing, but previously it was a living thing, so we call it once alive. Or another example can be leather. Okay, for example, it can be cow leather. Okay, cow leather is actually from animal skin. So the leather is now a non-living thing. It can be used to make your wallet or sometimes your sofa, but previously it is an animal, so it was once alive as well. Okay, but of course there's also another group under non-living things that is never alive. Never alive meaning before this it is also not alive. Okay, so a simple example will be your metal. Okay, metal comes from mining. Okay, before it was mined, it was not alive as well. Okay, a quick summary on what we have just spoken about just now. So living things are things that's alive, non-living things are things that's not alive. So the two new things that we have learned this week is that under non-living things, there are things that's never alive, and then there's also a group that is once alive. Now, another new terminology that you should know, another new word that you should know is extinct. Okay, extinct, that means it no longer exists anymore. So the most popular examples among children nowadays is that it's dinosaur lah, because dinosaur no longer exists, but it is actually a real living things in the past. That's why scientists are able to dig up their fossils, meaning their bones, okay, because it actually did exist on Earth in the past, but now it no longer exists. That's why we call it extinct. Okay, now we are going to talk about the characteristic of living things, which is very important. In fact, it's very important for the whole of this year lah, not just for this chapter. Okay, it will be heavily tested. So how do you know if something is a living thing or non-living thing? Okay, to know if it is a living thing, there are mainly four characteristics. The first one is that they grow. So for example, human beings, us, animals, plants, we all grow. Okay. The second characteristic is that they reproduce. Okay. So for human beings, we give birth. For animals, they can either lay eggs or give birth. Plants, they can either reproduce through seeds or spores. We will talk more about plants on the next chapter. And then certain living things, like for example bacteria, they reproduce by dividing themselves. Okay, or you can say splitting. Okay, thirdly, they all need air, food and water to stay alive. Okay, we need air to breathe. Even for plants, they also need air to breathe. We need to feed on something. For animals, for human beings, we need to feed on something. For plants, they can make their own food. Okay, they can create their own food. They don't need to feed on something. And we also all need to take in water. For us, we drink. Animals, they also drink. For plants, they take in water through their roots. Okay, how they do it, we also talk about in more detail in the chapters to come lah, because the next few chapters is about plants and animals. Okay, we have a more detailed look at how they take in all this. Okay, the next one is respond to changes. Okay, respond to changes. Respond meaning you will react to something. It doesn't necessarily have to be a movement that you can see. Okay, so for a movement, a response that we can see is, for example, if let's say you touch on something sharp or hot, you move your hand away. that's responding as well. Or if someone chases you, you run. That's a simple way of responding. Okay, but of course for plants we can't see that, but actually they do move. Okay, it can be as simple as the plants growing towards the sunlight. Okay, that's a common example of plants responding to changes. So actually plants also respond to changes. It's just that we can't see. Okay, so they are responding to changes may take some time to take place. So it's a delayed reaction. Okay, so as I was telling you, this is a very important chapter, very important part of the chapter. You must memorize it. Okay, you can forget a lot of things in this chapter, but you must definitely remember these four characteristics. Okay, which is to grow, to reproduce, need air, food, and water to stay alive, and respond to changes. Okay, you must memorize it because during exam they will test you. How they will test you? Mainly, they'll show you something. For example, they'll show maybe a toy or maybe a animal. Then they'll ask you how do you know if this is a living thing. So you must write down they grow, they reproduce, they need air, food, and water to stay alive, they respond to changes. Or maybe they can show you that a kitten become a cat. So you can say that this is a living thing because the kitten grew up to become a cat. Or they can show you maybe insects. Okay, cockroach, and then after that it lay eggs and have many young cockroach. Okay, so you can also say that this cockroach is a living thing because it reproduces. So you have to know these four characteristics to be able to answer these questions. Okay, so just now I told you that you can actually classify non-living things to once alive or never alive. Actually, there are many other ways to classify non-living things. Okay, you can classify whether or not it's made from natural material or man-made material. Okay, or it can be what state of matter. Okay, all this it's for the later part of the year or the next few years. Okay, for now we'll focus more on living things. So generally speaking, for this year you know that living things there are three main groups. Okay, namely the plant group, the animal group, and then decomposer group. For the decomposer, this year y'all will learn the word decomposer lah. Y'all just need know the word decomposer as fungi or bacteria. Okay. Now, so how is this three groups of living things different? Let's look at them. Okay. So firstly, let's look at their movement. Okay. For plants, right? Obviously they don't move lah. Okay, as in they don't move from location to location. They can't travel. Okay. Same thing for fungi. They also cannot travel. So if you want to think about a simple or common fungi, right, that would be mushroom. So mushroom is a common kind of fungi. The mushroom obviously don't travel from location to location. Okay, mushroom is a fungi, it's not a plant. Fungi and plants are different. Plants they can make their own food. Fungi they cannot. Okay, same thing. We'll learn more about fungi and plants in the chapter to come. As for animals, they can move from location to location. Okay, we are considered animal. Okay, so that's why we can also move from location to location. So just now we also talked briefly about how they get food. So for plants, they can create their own food. For animals, we have to feed on others. For example, we have to eat. Likewise, other animals, they can also either feed on plants or other smaller animals. Okay. As for fungi, right, they can feed on things that are alive or dead. Okay, so mushroom, they can grow on living things as well. Okay, so they feed on the living things. For plants, they reproduce by either seeds or spores. Okay, what type of plant reproduce by seeds? What type of plants reproduce by spores? It depends on whether or not it's flowering or non-flowering. For animals, they can either give birth or lay eggs. For us human beings, we give birth lah. We belong to this animal group called mammals. As for fungi, they reproduce by spores. Okay, so when you go to the fungi and bacteria chapter, you learn about bacteria, right? So bacteria reproduce by dividing itself. Okay, so take note. Although fungi reproduce by spores, plants also reproduce by spores, but although the way of reproduction is the same, but they are different. Plants is plants, fungi is fungi because of how they get their food. Just now we were talking about whether or not plants can move from location to location, whether or not it can travel. But what about whether or not plants can move their own parts or can they move within themselves? Okay, the answer is yes. Okay, there are a few examples on how plants can actually move. Firstly, for example, carnivorous plants. Carnivorous plants are basically plants that also feed on insects. So simple example is the picture here, which is a Venus flytrap. Okay, so it actually move closing of its leaves. Okay, like for example the mimosa plant. I think you should have played with it before. When you touch it, right? Okay, like the picture here, you close its leaves. Okay, or the most common example is when plants grow towards the sunlight. Okay, so if you have ever grown a plant before, realize that they'll grow towards the window because that's where there's light. Okay, the last one is certain flowers, right? They will face the east to the west from day to night, so they'll change the direction of where they are facing. Okay, so based on this, right, you can actually see that plants actually do move their own body parts. Okay, um, certain all plants will also transport food and water within themselves, so inside their body the food and water is actually traveling, moving as well. It's just that we cannot see it. Okay, the most commonly discussed one, it's the growing towards the sunlight. Okay, uh, almost every exam paper in P3 will talk about this. Okay, so this one is something important that you need to remember. Okay, plants will always grow towards the sunlight. Okay, so how can we classify non-living things? As we already discussed earlier, you can classify on whether they are never alive or alive. You can also classify them based on the materials they are made from. Okay, whether they are from natural materials, that means materials that is found naturally. Like for example, cotton is found from cotton plant. Okay, or man-made material like for example plastic, which is created by man. Okay, we can also classify them based on their material type. Okay, so from what materials they are made of. These are a few common examples. Okay, likewise, you can also classify them based on their properties. Okay, for example, whether or not they float or sink. So, for example, wood can float and then metal will sink. Okay, we can whether or not also classify them by whether or not they are strong or weak. Okay, strong meaning it won't break easily, whereas weak that means it breaks easily lah. Or it can whether or not it is waterproof or water absorbent, whether or not it absorbs water. Okay, but of course these are not all the properties. Okay, there's a one whole chapter about just material itself in P3. Okay, in summary, this is what you learned today. Okay, living things, they grow, they reproduce, they respond to changes, they need air, food and water to stay alive. Whereas non-living things, right, is the direct opposite. Okay, so you realize that the characteristic on the left and the right is exactly the same, just that the one on the right is the direct opposite of the living things. So as long as you can memorize this one, the four characteristics of living things, then you're good already. Because once you memorize the four characteristics of living things, you just have to know that the non-living thing is the direct opposite. Okay, and like I mentioned earlier, this is a very important thing that you must memorize in this chapter. Okay, you must memorize by heart. Okay, and then we also learn about the three main groups of living things, which is your plants, animals, and your fungi, bacteria. Okay, you should also remember the uh, first few first few word we learned in this chapter, which is extinction. Okay, like I told you before, extinction, that means they no longer exist anymore. So one of the main reason living things reproduce is because it is to prevent extinction. Okay, because if they don't reproduce, there'll be no such animal later on, because animals they'll or plants they'll grow old and then they'll die. Okay, so if they don't reproduce, they'll no longer exist, so they're extinct. So the purpose of reproduction is to prevent extinction. Okay, also we learn once alive and never alive as well. Okay, so these are the few things that you need to learn. Okay, and most importantly, this is what you need to memorize. Okay, very important, I already mentioned a lot of times. Okay, so let's practice classifying things. Okay, usually during exam we'll use words lah. but for now, for start, we'll just classify using pictures. Okay, so birds, obviously it is a living thing. Okay, dogs, living thing. Table obviously is not alive, so it's non-living thing. Okay, um, tree is a living thing, books is a non-living thing, and chair is a non-living thing. Okay, it doesn't always have to be equal on both sides. It can be one on one side and then maybe 5 on the other side. Okay, now let's try another practice. Okay, so let's practice classifying based on whether or not they are living things, never alive, or once alive. Okay, so let's see. Okay, people, human beings, we are living things. Okay, that's about it. Okay, there's no other living things here that I can see of. Okay, what about never alive? Never alive, that means last time it is not alive, now it is also not alive. Okay, music is scientifically is not alive. Water as well. Air. What else? Let's see. Metal. Okay, like I say, metal comes from mining in the caves, so it's never alive. Glass is a man-made material, it is never alive. Okay, so these three, it is once alive. Why? Because eraser comes from rubber, rubber comes from rubber tree, so last time it is alive, now it's made into a eraser for you to use already, so it's not alive anymore. Okay, how do you know that? Or your eraser don't need air, food, and water, or your eraser doesn't grow, your eraser doesn't reproduce. Same for wood and paper lah. They don't reproduce, they don't grow, they don't respond to changes. Okay, but wood comes from tree, right? And tree used to grow, they used to reproduce. So tree is alive, but wood is not alive. So wood is once alive. Last time alive when it was a tree, but now no longer alive. And then same thing, paper also comes from tree lah. Okay, so that's how you classify them.